Ooh, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word. Had the wrong thumbnail up there, so excuse that. Welcome to the Daily Word Bible study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in the Matthew chapter 14. It's getting a little late start today, so I'm kind of discombobulated here. That's why. But anyway, we're in Matthew chapter 14, and what's interesting about Matthew 14, um, Peter, Peter, one of the most astounding stories in this is that Peter walks on water. And we're going to get to the story, but he walks on water. And then what's more astounding is his doubt that causes him to sink. Now, when we go through the Bible, the Jews' unbelief is unbelievable. Okay, the Jews' unbelief is unbelievable. Okay, it's just amazing that. All right, let's get to it though. But their unbelief, the Jews' unbelief, is unbelievable. And let me tell you why. No other nation, no other people has had the manifestation from God that they have. No other nation, no other people, no other race, no other ethnicity that before their eyes, God breaks the yoke of the mightiest nation at the time off of their necks with signs and wonders, the plagues of Egypt. And then he parts the Red Sea. They travel through the Red Sea. When they get to the other side, Pharaoh and his armies pursues them and they drown in the sea. And then their journey, God would lead them with a pillar of fire by night, and a cloud by day. Numerous miraculous manifestations. One of the lowliest nations, but God would give them great victories. And time and time and time, generation after generation after generation, you see the unbelief. And that I can't explain it. It's just amazing. Now, I don't know. We certainly could say that we probably would react differently in the case. I don't know. And here you see that in this generation, and this is the greatest generation ever in this respect, that they see the Son of God in the flesh, that he performs more miracles, and yet you still see the Jews' unbelief. So here we go. All right. So, after the beheading of John the Baptist, okay, Jesus, he retreats, right? In other words, John the Baptist is beheaded. They come and they take John's disciples. They retrieve his corpse, his beheaded corpse, And then they tell Jesus he's dead. Now, verse 13 says, and when Jesus heard about it, he withdrew from there by boat to a remote place to be alone. When the crowds heard this, they followed him on foot from the towns. As he stepped ashore, he saw a huge crowd, felt compassion for them, and healed their sick. When evening came, the disciples approached him and said, this place is a wilderness, and it is already late. Send the crowds away so they can go into the village and buy food for themselves. They don't need to go anywhere, Jesus told them. You give them something to eat. But we only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes, they said to him. Bring them here to me. Now in John, we later see that this little boy had these 5 loaves and the bread. He said, verse 19, he commanded the crowds to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed them. He broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowd. And then everyone ate and was filled. Then he picked up the baskets full of leftover pieces. Now those that ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Now, what is always interesting about this, story is, first of all, the timing of this miracle. We're in the last year of Jesus' ministry, so probably within 6 months of him going to the cross. So you see these miracles, and so I'm doing some math here as well. I'm going to just show you something. Let's say $4. But so during the last year of his ministry, these signs testify more about Jesus. Okay, more about Jesus, that he is the Messiah. So they said, but let me just show you kind of one of the miracles about this here. Just using this figure here of 5,000. And by the way, this 5,000 men. They didn't count the women and the children. That's kind of how the times were. In fact, if you go back and you read the law, women were just a step above slaves. So, and you can see, and again, we won't get into the why of that, but they just didn't count the women and the children. Now, if we were to, let's take a kind of a math right here and say, like, if Jesus, if this was today, and if you only went to, let's say, McDonald's and got a fish sandwich, right? So you got bread and fish, just a fish sandwich, okay? And you fed just the men, that would be $20,000. Now just think, okay? If we kind of, just a conservative group of about 15,000. Now, it could be more or less, because when you think about women and children and their their families. So, some have 2, some have 1, some have 5, some have 6. But notice this is that everyone, so then that roundabout figure would have been around 60,000 conservative, if you counted 15,000. So just in today's numbers, Jesus would have had 60,000 people. Spent 60,000, by the way, for free with the power of God. But not only that, but keep this in mind, that's just a McDonald's fish sandwich. Notice they ate and were filled. So they kept eating until they were filled. And then Jesus tells them, pick up the baskets full of leftover pieces. So again, um, um, another mighty sign. Verse 22 says, immediately he made his disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side. And while he dismissed the crowd, after dismissing the crowd, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. Now notice he went up to this mountain and he's praying while they were supposed to be going to the other side of the boat, right? Now no one probably asked Jesus, well, how are you going to get to the other side, right? No one asked, hey, Jesus, how are you going to get if we're going to the other side of the boat, how are you going to get to the other side of the boat? Now, verse 24, but the boat was already over a mile from land, battered by the waves because of the wind was against him. And around 3 in the morning, he came toward them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. Now, you could probably imagine and understand why Peter and them would have been afraid seeing someone walk on the water. Now, here's kind of interesting too. Just there are critics of the Bible, and they always seek to discredit these miraculous stories. So that, for example, one of these stories here is that, well, Jesus really wasn't walking on the water. He probably was just walking on maybe 2 or 3 inches. Well, either way, if he's walking on 2 or 3 inches versus 100 feet or whatever the depth of the sea were, it's still he's walking on the water. Watch this. So verse 27. Even, verse 26. And when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they said, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. Immediately Jesus spoke to them. Have courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you. Now, at this point, you hear his voice, you see him, but notice it. If it's you, Peter answered him, command me to come to you on the water. Kind of an odd request, right? But Peter was always kind of, and you know, he was very spontaneous that way. So verse 29, come, he said, and climbing down out of the boat, Peter started walking on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out his hand, caught hold of him, and said to him, oh, you have little faith, why did you doubt? When they got to the boat, the wind ceased. And then those in the boat worshiped him and said, truly, you are the Son of God. But wait a minute. This is kind of amazing because, again, yeah, Peter, about that. Let's go back. You were walking on the water. What is amazing about this is that here he's walking on the water. Under any circumstances, he could not walk on the water. So why would the winds cause him to doubt? Think about that. Why would the wind cause him to doubt when in any circumstance he could not walk on the water apart from the power of God? That's why I say his doubt is unbelievable. His unbelief is unbelievable. Now, again, to the critics, if then Jesus was only walking in 2 or 3 inches of water or 2 or 3 feet of water, one, even if it's an inch of water, if he was walking on the water, that's still miraculous. One. Two, how would Peter sink in 2 or 3 feet of water? So that just kind of shows you, again, their unbelief. They're unwilling to believe the story, okay? Now, some people say the same thing, that when the Israelites passed through the Red Sea, they said that the critics would say, well, they walked through 2 or 3 feet of water. Well, again, you're calling this story a liar, because remember, they parted. So, well, what was parted? And wide enough. Now, watch remember the story of the crossing of the Red Sea was the waters parted, and they had to wait. By the way, it was kind of intense too, because Pharaoh was being held back. Pharaoh and his armies were being held back by the pillar of fire, and so therefore, or a cloud by day, and they could not pass because until Israel had made their way through. But Israel, they had to wait until the ground dry. So they didn't. You can imagine. So watch this. However deep, it still would have been muddy. You got people walking through, carts, animals, whatever. The Bible says they walked through on dry ground. They walked through on dry ground. So then, if it was only 2 or 3 feet, there's two problems. They walked through with a wall of water on either side. And two, how would they drown in 2 or 3 feet of water? How would the horses drown? That's just, again, unbelief. But back to Peter. Peter, you're walking on the water, and the strength of the wind caused you to doubt. Why? And it's like, why? You're walking on the water. But notice the mercy of God. Okay. Didn't let him sink. Okay. And that's kind of interesting, because too, sometimes that even though in our weaknesses, our failures, our inabilities, God still looks out for us. So I think there's a lesson in that too. But he did rebuke him and said, "Oh, you little faith, why did you doubt?" So verse 34 says, once they crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of the place recognized him, they alerted the whole vicinity and brought him all who were sick. Now, they had faith. It said that they were begging him that they might only touch the tassel of his robe, and as many as touched it were made perfectly well. Now, you maybe they heard the story about the woman who had the issue of blood for 12 years, and then she touched Jesus. She touched the hem of his garment, and then she was made whole. And that probably could have been an inspiration of their faith. Regardless of that, Jesus by now is known as the healer, is known as the Messiah. He is demonstrating himself as the Messiah. And here's the interesting thing. Notice this town. They not only the town, I'm sorry, the whole vicinity. So this could have been several villages. They just got the word out. Now, on a side note, too, sometimes this is one of the reasons why Jesus would oftentimes heal people and say, don't tell anybody, because he didn't want the whole town coming out, because sometimes it may mess up his plans. But notice they came, and notice they brought all who were sick, and they were begging him that they might just touch. Look, you ain't got to pray, and you ain't got to do all this. Just let us touch the hem. And the interesting thing is that everyone who touched was healed. Now, you contrast that to his hometown. His hometown of Nazareth, who very few people got healed. Why? Because of their unbelief. Unbelievable. Okay, unbelievable. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. And subscribe to the Bible Plain and Simple. All right, so if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.